I was 21 that winter, old enough to believe I understood myself, young enough to still be surprised by the quiet ways life could corner me. The night everything began, rain tapped gently against the apartment windows, steady and patient, like it had all the time in the world. My best friend Adam had cancelled on me last minute. Family thing, he said. I didn't ask questions. I never did when it came to his family. Especially his father. Mr. Harris lived alone in a high-rise near the river, the kind of building with polished stone floors and lights that never fully turned off. He'd invited me over to wait for Adam, said it made no sense for me to go all the way home. His voice on the phone had been calm, familiar. Almost too calm. I told myself it was harmless. I'd been to his apartment before. Always during the day. Always with Adam. But that night, the hallway felt longer, the air heavier, as if the building itself was holding its breath. When I knocked, there was a pause, just a second too long, before the door opened. "You're early," he said, smiling faintly. His smile lingered longer than usual. I noticed stupid things then, the soft glow of the lamps instead of the overhead lights, the faint smell of coffee even though it was nearly midnight, the jacket he draped over the chair like he wasn't expecting anyone else. Adam wasn't there. He stepped out, Mr. Harris said, locking the door behind me. Said he'd be back soon. Soon felt vague, uncertain. I sat on the edge of the couch, my coat still on, hands folded like I was afraid of touching anything. The rain outside grew louder. The clock on the wall ticked with unnecessary confidence. I kept checking my phone, but there were no messages. No missed calls. I told myself not to read into things. Still, I felt it, that low hum of awareness in my chest. The way his eyes followed me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way silence stretched between us, not awkward, not comfortable, charged. "You've grown," he said suddenly. I laughed, unsure. I guess. His gaze didn't move away. That was when I realized how alone we were. I tried to focus on ordinary thoughts, college deadlines, unfinished assignments, the rain, but my mind kept circling back to questions I didn't want answers to. Why hadn't Adam come back? Why hadn't his father turned on more lights? Why did every small sound, the clink of a glass, the shift of his weight, feel amplified? When my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. "Sorry, won't make it tonight." That was it. No explanation. I looked up, ready to say I'd leave. But Mr. Harris was already closer than before, his expression unreadable. "You can stay," he said softly. "It's late, and the storm doesn't look like it's stopping." The rain thundered in agreement. I swallowed, suddenly aware that something had shifted, something quiet, dangerous, and impossible to name. And as the clock ticked on, I couldn't help but wonder, had Adam really just forgotten me, or had this night been unfolding long before I ever knocked on that door? The storm didn't fade the way storms usually do. It settled in, heavy and persistent, like it had decided to stay the night. I took off my coat slowly, folding it on my lap instead of placing it anywhere permanent. That small choice felt important, like leaving myself an exit. Mr. Harris poured coffee into a mug I hadn't asked for and set it on the table between us. The steam curled upward, soft and slow. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm tired," I replied. That was true enough, just not the whole truth. He sat across from me, close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. I'd known him for years, barbecues, graduation parties, quick nods when he picked Adam up late at night, but this felt like meeting someone new. Or maybe seeing someone I'd never really looked at before. The TV was on, muted. Flickering light filled the room with shifting shadows. Outside, the rain smeared the city into streaks of silver. Minutes passed. Too many. Did Adam say when he'd be back? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Mr. Harris shook his head. No, he's unpredictable sometimes. That word hung there. Unpredictable. I checked my phone again. Nothing new. The battery icon blinked red, a quiet warning. "You can charge it," he offered, pointing toward the kitchen counter. When I stood, my legs felt stiff, like I'd been sitting much longer than I realized. As I crossed the room, I felt his eyes on my back. The awareness made my shoulders tense, my breath shallow. I told myself it was paranoia. Or ego? Or both? The kitchen light buzzed softly when I flipped it on. The sound was sharp in the silence. I plugged in my phone, then stayed there a moment longer than necessary, palms pressed against the counter. Get a grip, I thought. He's just Adam's dad. But that thought didn't settle me the way it should have. Adam talks about you a lot, Mr. Harris said from behind me. I turned. Really? He nodded. Says you're the one who keeps him grounded. I laughed quietly. That's not how I'd describe it. He stepped closer, leaning against the opposite counter. Not invading my space. Not backing away either. You don't see yourself the way others do, he said. There was something in his tone, gentle, observant, that made my chest tighten. Compliments always did that to me, especially when they came from someone who felt off limits. The coffee sat untouched in the living room. I realized I didn't want it anymore. We talked about school, about the city, about nothing important and everything that filled the gaps between our words. He listened in a way that made me forget I was choosing my sentences carefully. When he laughed, it was low and brief, like he was holding something back. At some point, the rain softened. The silence grew louder. I noticed things then, how his sleeves were rolled up, forearms resting casually on the counter. How close the apartment felt now, despite its size. How the ticking clock had disappeared, either turned off or drowned out by my own pulse. You can take the guest room, he said eventually. If you want. The offer landed heavier than it should have. I might head out, I said, too quickly. He studied me, not judgmental, not surprised, just aware. It's past 1, he said. And the trains aren't running smoothly in this weather. I hesitated. Logic warred with instinct. Convenience with discomfort. Just for a bit, I said. Until the rain eases. He smiled again, that same measured smile, and gestured down the hall. Bathroom's the second door. Towels are clean. The hallway was dim, lit only by a small lamp at the far end. As I walked, the carpet muffled my steps, making the space feel unreal, like I was moving through someone else's dream. I closed the bathroom door behind me and leaned against it, breathing out slowly. My reflection looked different under the yellow light. Older, uncertain. You're imagining things, I told myself. When I stepped back into the hallway, I heard something. A soft sound, not quite a voice, not quite the TV. It stopped as soon as I paused. Everything okay, Mr. Harris called. Yeah, I answered, even though my heart had started to race. I returned to the living room, perching on the far end of the couch this time. He sat again, closer than before, though he hadn't moved suddenly. The space between us felt deliberate. Charged. My wife used to love storms, he said suddenly. I glanced at him. He rarely talked about her. She'd passed years ago, a quiet fact in Adam's life that no one poked at. She said they made everything feel honest, he continued. Like the world couldn't pretend. I didn't know what to say. So I listened. There are nights, he said, eyes fixed on the window, when silence feels louder than thunder. Something about that confession unsettled me. It felt too personal, too intimate, like a door cracking open that shouldn't have been touched. I shifted, my knee brushing his by accident, or maybe not. Neither of us moved away. The TV flickered, briefly illuminating his face. For a second, our eyes met. The moment stretched, fragile and dangerous. I stood abruptly. I should check the rain. He didn't stop me, just watched as I crossed to the window, palms pressed to the cool glass. Outside, the streets glistened, empty and reflective. No sign of stopping. Behind me, I felt him approach before I heard him. His presence filled the space, warm and solid, close enough that I could sense his breath. Looks like it's staying, he said quietly. My throat tightened. Yeah. Neither of us moved. I wondered then, when the line had begun to blur. When waiting had turned into something else entirely. When Adam's absence had stopped feeling temporary and started feeling intentional. I turned slightly, just enough to see him in my peripheral vision. He didn't step back, and in that suspended moment, with the storm outside and the silence pressing in, I realized the night wasn't building towards something sudden. It had already started. The only question was how far it was willing to go, and whether I would stop it when it did. the power went out without warning. 1 second the apartment glowed with muted lamplight, the next it was swallowed by darkness so complete it felt physical, like a hand pressed over my eyes. The TV cut to silence. The hum of electricity vanished. Even the rain seemed to pause, stunned. I sucked in a sharp breath. Storm must have hit a transformer, Mr. Harris said calmly, though his voice sounded closer than I expected. Too close. I could feel him beside me now, our outlines reduced to shadows. The city outside offered faint, fractured light through the windows, just enough to make movement uncertain. My heart thudded hard, loud in my ears. It'll come back on, he added. It usually does. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. My palms were damp. I wiped them against my jeans, suddenly aware of every inch of space between us, and how little of it remained. He moved first. I heard the soft scrape of a drawer opening, then the flick of a lighter. A candle flared to life, small and unsteady, casting warm light that bent the room into something intimate and unfamiliar. The shadows danced. He set the candle on the table between us. The flame reflected in his eyes when he looked at me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded. Sorry, I said, though I wasn't sure for what. For being here. For staying. For not leaving when I still could. You didn't do anything wrong, he replied. That word, wrong, landed hard. I sat down slowly, my movements careful, deliberate. He sat too, mirroring me without comment. The candlelight softened his features, made him look less like Adam's father and more like just a man sitting across from me, sharing a moment he hadn't planned but hadn't stopped either. This is weird, I said quietly, forcing a laugh that didn't convince either of us. Yes, he agreed. It is. He didn't rush to fix it. Didn't fill the space with excuses or jokes. He let the truth sit there, between us, as steady as the flame. My phone buzzed suddenly on the counter. We both glanced toward the sound. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be Adam. Some last-minute apology. Some interruption that would snap everything back into place. I stood, grabbed it, my fingers trembling as I unlocked the screen. Low battery. No new messages. I stared at it longer than necessary, then set it back down. He's not coming, I said. Mr. Harris exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding that breath for hours. No, he said. I don't think he is. The admission changed something. It felt like crossing a line you can't uncross, even if you step back later. I looked at him then, really looked. At the way his jaw tightened, at the careful distance he still maintained, at the conflict flickering across his face like the candle's shadow. He wasn't predatory. He wasn't careless. That almost made it worse. You should go to bed, he said, after a pause. The guest room's ready. That was the responsible choice. The safe one. I stood again, my body moving on instinct rather than decision. But instead of heading down the hall, I stopped. The words caught in my throat, heavy and dangerous. Do you ever? I began, then stopped. He waited. Didn't push. Do you ever feel like some things are only wrong because no one talks about them? I asked. The question hung there, fragile and reckless. His expression shifted, surprise, recognition, something deeper. Yes, he said quietly. I do. My chest tightened. That doesn't mean they're not wrong, I added quickly, guilt flaring hot and sharp. No, he agreed. It doesn't. The candle flickered violently, reacting to some unseen current of air. For a second, the room plunged back into shadow, then returned to light. My pulse raced. I should go, I said again. You can, he replied. Right now. But neither of us moved. The storm outside surged back to life, rain hammering the windows with renewed force. Thunder rolled low and distant, like a warning. I don't want to hurt Adam, I whispered. That was the truth at the center of everything. He closed his eyes briefly, as if the name physically pained him. Neither do I. The distance between us felt unbearable now, not because it was small, but because it existed at all. Every instinct told me to step back, to create space, to end the moment before it became something irreversible. Instead, I took one step closer. I hated myself for it. And I needed it. He noticed. Of course he did. His breath changed, subtle but unmistakable. He didn't reach for me. That restraint screamed louder than any touch could have. "Stop," he said softly. Not commanding, pleading. I froze, torn between relief and disappointment. My heart pounded so hard I thought he must hear it. "I don't trust myself," he continued. "And I don't want you to mistake confusion for something else." I swallowed. "I know exactly what this is," I said, even as doubt twisted in my gut. Did I? The candle sputtered again, the flame shrinking dangerously low. Wax dripped down the side, pooling like time running out. For one suspended moment, we stood there, close enough to feel each other's warmth, far enough to pretend we still had control. The air between us crackled with everything unsaid. Then the lights snapped back on. Bright, harsh, unforgiving. The spell shattered instantly. The apartment looked like itself again. Clean lines, neutral colors, no place for shadows to hide. The candle burned uselessly now, exposed. We both stepped back at the same time. I laughed nervously, rubbing my arms. "Guess that's my cue." He nodded, running a hand through his hair, suddenly older, heavier. "I'll show you to the room." We walked down the hallway in silence, the normal lighting making the distance between us feel wider than before. He stopped outside the guest room, hand resting briefly on the doorframe. "Get some sleep," he said. "We'll talk in the morning." Talk about what? I wondered. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my legs weak. My reflection in the dark window looked shaken, conflicted, awake in a way sleep wouldn't touch. Outside, the storm raged on. And somewhere in the apartment beyond that door, so did the question neither of us had answered, whether the line we'd approached would hold, or whether it had already been crossed the moment the lights went out. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, counting cracks that blurred together as my thoughts spiraled. Every sound felt amplified, the distant rumble of thunder, the soft tick of the thermostat, the muted footsteps somewhere beyond the door. Each one sent a jolt through me, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. I replayed everything in fragments. The candlelight, the way his voice softened when he said my name, the moment the lights came back on and reality snapped into place like a stretched cord finally breaking. Nothing happened, I told myself. And yet everything had. I turned onto my side, pressing my face into the pillow, trying to smother the guilt before it could grow teeth. Adam's face surfaced in my mind, easy smile, careless trust. The thought made my chest ache. Sometime later, I wasn't sure how much time had passed, I heard the faint creak of a floorboard in the hallway. Then another, slow, careful, as if someone was moving while trying not to be heard. My breath caught. The footsteps stopped just outside the guest room door. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The silence stretched so thin it felt like it might tear. I imagined his hand hovering near the door, imagined the weight of the decision on the other side of it. Nothing happened. After a long moment, the steps retreated, fading back toward the living room. Relief washed over me, sharp and dizzying. I closed my eyes, heart racing. By the time morning arrived, the storm had moved on. Pale light crept through the curtains, gentle and indifferent. For a few seconds, everything felt normal, until memory rushed back in. I dressed quickly, avoiding the mirror. The apartment was quiet when I stepped out of the room. Too quiet. The living room looked unchanged, pristine, as if the night before had been a shared hallucination. The candle was gone. The coffee cups were washed and put away. Mr. Harris stood by the kitchen counter, already dressed, reading something on his phone. He looked up when he heard me. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied. Our eyes met, then broke away almost immediately. The air between us was different now, tense, restrained, weighted with everything we weren't saying. He gestured toward the counter. "There's coffee, if you want." I nodded, pouring myself a cup I barely tasted. My hands shook slightly, and I hated that he noticed. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Not really." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Me neither." That was all he said about it. No apologies, no explanations, just acknowledgement. "I'll head out soon," I said, staring into the mug. Adam texted me earlier. He's busy today. The lie slipped out easily. Too easily. Mr. Harris's jaw tightened, just for a second. Right. Silence again. Thick. Pressing. "I want to be clear," he said finally, his voice low but steady. About last night. My stomach clenched. I looked up, bracing myself. It shouldn't have gone as far as it did, he continued. And it won't happen again. The words landed like a door closing. Necessary. Painful. I know, I said quickly. I agree. And I meant it. Mostly. He nodded once, as if sealing something shut. Good. I finished my coffee and set the cup down, the clink louder than it should have been. When I grabbed my jacket, he stepped aside, giving me a clear path to the door. No lingering. No excuses. At the threshold, I hesitated. Adam doesn't need to know, I said quietly. I know, he replied. Our eyes met one last time, longer than before. There was regret there, and something else, buried deep enough to deny. I left without another word. The hallway felt different in daylight. Less ominous. More ordinary. As the elevator descended, my reflection stared back at me, calmer, composed, hiding the tremor underneath. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars splashed through puddles. People hurried past, unaware. But as I walked away from the building, one thought refused to let go. Nothing had crossed the line. And yet, the line would never look the same again. The real damage wasn't in what almost happened, it was in knowing how close we'd come, and how easily silence could turn into something dangerous if given the chance. And the worst part, I wasn't sure whether I was relieved or disappointed. When he finally showed up at my place, he acted normal, too normal. Dropped onto my couch, complained about work, scrolled on his phone like the world hadn't quietly tilted off its axis. I matched his energy, laughed in the right places, nodded at the right times. It felt like a performance we both knew the lines to. But every time he mentioned his father, my chest tightened. He's been weird lately, Adam said offhandedly, not looking up. Distant. You notice that? I forced a shrug. Maybe he's just tired. The lie tasted bitter. I wondered what Mr. Harris had told him, or what he hadn't. Silence, I was learning, was a powerful thing. It could protect. It could rot. It could sit between people like a loaded weapon no one wanted to acknowledge. Adam stayed for dinner, then left. Hugged me like always. Trusted me like always. That night, I dreamed of candlelight and shadows that stretched too far across the walls. Weeks passed. Life resumed its routine, but something underneath it all felt off-kilter. I avoided his father deliberately, declined invitations, made excuses when Adam suggested we all meet up. Distance felt safer, cleaner, but safety has a way of drawing attention to itself. The first time I ran into Mr. Harris again was by accident. I was leaving a cafe near campus when I saw him through the window, seated at a corner table, coffee untouched. He looked up at the exact moment I did, as if he'd sensed me before I was even there. Our eyes locked. For a second, the noise of the street faded. No storm, no darkness, just that same charged stillness, sharp and undeniable. He stood slowly, hesitated, then pushed the door open. Hey, he said. Hey. We didn't move closer, didn't step away either. How are you? He asked. Fine, I said. Then, after a beat, you. He nodded once. Same. Another lie, another mutual agreement not to press. People passed around us, unaware they were navigating the space between something unfinished. I noticed small details again, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands stayed firmly in his coat pockets, like he didn't trust them. I think Adam suspects something, he said quietly. My stomach dropped. What kind of something? I don't know, he replied. But he's watching, asking questions. Fear prickled up my spine. About me? Yes. The word echoed. We stood there, suspended between past and future, neither of us willing to name what had almost happened, or what still lingered beneath the surface. We should stop talking, I said. He nodded. We should have already. Yet neither of us moved. A bus roared past, breaking the moment. When I looked back, his expression had hardened into something controlled. Resolved. Take care, he said. You too. He walked away without looking back. I stood there long after, my coffee forgotten, heart racing with questions I didn't want answers to. How close had we really come? Had the danger passed, or simply changed shape? That night, My phone buzzed with a message from Adam. "Can we talk tomorrow? About you and my dad." I stared at the screen, pulse pounding, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on me. For the first time, I realized the storm hadn't ended that night. It had only gone quiet. And I didn't know whether what came next would be truth, or the kind of silence that destroys everything it touches. That evening began like any other, quiet, ordinary, almost boring. The sky outside was a dull gray, the kind that promised rain but hadn't delivered yet. I remember standing at the bus stop, hands shoved into my jacket pockets, scrolling through my phone and thinking about nothing in particular. Adam was late. Again. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the message he sent a few minutes later. "Go to my place. Dad's home. I'll be there soon." No apology. No explanation. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. I'd been friends with Adam for years. His father, Mr. Harris, had always been a background figure in our lives. Polite, reserved, the kind of man who spoke just enough to be respected and not enough to be known. I'd never had a reason to feel uncomfortable around him. At least, not until that night. The building was quiet when I arrived, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own footsteps. His apartment door opened almost immediately after I knocked, as if he'd been standing right behind it. "You made it," he said, stepping aside. The place smelled faintly of wood polish and coffee. Everything looked carefully arranged, too carefully. The lights were dimmer than I remembered, the curtains drawn even though it was still early. Outside, the first drops of rain began tapping against the windows, soft but insistent. "Adam's running late," he said, locking the door. I nodded, shrugging off my jacket. "Yeah," he mentioned. We settled into a routine that wasn't really a routine at all. Small talk, polite smiles, the hum of a muted television filling the gaps between sentences. I sat on the edge of the couch, posture stiff, while he moved around the apartment with practiced ease. I told myself I was overthinking things. Still, I noticed details I never had before. The way his gaze lingered a second too long. The pause before he answered simple questions. The way silence didn't feel empty, but loaded, like something unspoken was pressing against it from both sides. "You've changed," he said suddenly. I looked up. "Changed how?" He tilted his head, studying me. "You seem quieter." I forced a smile. "Life, I guess." He nodded, but his eyes didn't soften. Minutes stretched. The rain grew heavier. Adam still hadn't arrived. I checked my phone. No new messages. Where is he? I wondered. And more unsettling, why didn't I just leave? When a low rumble of thunder rolled through the apartment, the lights flickered briefly. My pulse jumped for no good reason at all. Mr. Harris noticed. "Storms make people uneasy," he said. "They strip things down, leave no place to hide." I laughed weakly, though his words settled uncomfortably in my chest. As the evening deepened and the world outside disappeared behind sheets of rain, I felt it, that subtle shift, that quiet awareness that something was about to change. Not loudly, not dramatically, but irreversibly. And sitting there, waiting for someone who wasn't coming, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night wasn't an accident at all. It was an opening. The only question was whether I would step back before it closed. Or walk straight into whatever was waiting on the other side.